Welcome, welcome. Topic, what are three ways to negate a mentoring arrangement? We find ourselves here today because people have been asking us about what are ways that I might run into some difficulty in my mentoring arrangement. So we started poking around, asking people what they saw as the potential negations. And we are creating a video series of 3 videos. This is the second of 3. And we're going to be looking at providing inaccurate or misleading guidance today, the lack of empathy and understanding. And the third one is a failure to adopt, adapt, and evolve. And Doug and I said, okay, I think it's time to take a look at them. And these are the 3 next ones that came to mind. And here we are today. So Stephen Hobbs out of Wealth Movement and co-founder of the International Mentoring Community. And I have Doug with me. Doug, you want to just briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Doug Lawrence. I have my own, my own company, Talent C, and I'm co-founder of the International Mentoring Community as well.
Yeah, and the 2 of us get together to put these video for you, put them together for you in response to questions that we get, or we find a topic that goes, oh, I think it's time to cover this one, to get it out there through the International Mentoring Community. And these 3 topics that surface for us, so we had to dig around just a little bit for them because we wanted to just get clarity about what we think people were asking. So we had to do a little give and take, and these are how we framed them up. So the way we're going to tackle them is each one, and then at the end, if there's some pattern that we'd like to share with you, we can, and then we'll pop out of here. We're looking at somewhere between 13 and 21 minutes, just to give you a heads up. Now, for the previous 3, there will be a link below, and you can check those out. And a couple of weeks from now, we'll probably do the last 4. We have a couple already identified, and we're still poking around trying to see if there's a couple more. We're going to use the magic number of 10 to get the list of 10 to get things up and started. So let's jump into this. The first one that we wanted to tackle was when the mentor and the mentee. So again, it's probably good for us to just share at the beginning. While we're talking about this through a mentor lens, there is a reciprocal aspect of the mentee that's involved here, because mentoring is a holistic, reciprocal exchange that takes place. And it would not be correct if we didn't mention about the mentee at this point in time. Well, let's go for it. Mentor, providing inaccurate or misleading guidance. The way that I sort of pull this forward, and then I'm just going to ask Doug from his deep practice perspective what he's got on mind. But for me, when I was in a mentoring arrangement and I was the mentee, I encountered a couple of times mentors who really didn't know the answer, and they give me some fluff and bluff. And after a while, it didn't pass the smell test. And I always remember that for myself. I said, look, if I'm not going to give accurate, or I'm going to give sort of inaccurate or misleading guidance, it would be better for me to not say anything and say, let's work together and find the response to the question. Do you want to add to this? Because I'm sure over the years you've encountered times where you almost slipped into it yourself, or you've encountered it. So thoughts, Doug?
Well, for me, one of the big things, and it's an outcome of doing what you've spelt out, is the aspect of trust. And if I'm a mentor and I'm giving misguiding information, out of date information, inaccurate advice, and that, I'm not doing any favors for my mentee, because they rely on me and and me being their mentor. And if I'm not following through and I'm not being accountable, then that becomes an issue, a big issue, especially nowadays with trying to establish trust in relationships as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, that the mentee is tapping into you as mentor, your experience, your expertise from a knowledge skills perspective, the stories that you can share. And I know sometimes I might embellish a story, but not to a point that it would be inaccurate, because I'm attempting to make a point linked to the mentee from my experience, but my experience may not have been directly connected to what the mentee is looking for, but I'm embellishing it just a little bit. So I don't think of that as an inaccurate or misleading in any way. But at the same time, I'm always going, hang on, don't go too far. Don't go too far down this road, or don't jump in our car and drive down this road. Stay present and respond to the question that's coming forth. And I think that this one also springs to mind, Doug, this notion of collaboration, right? Is that there is no need to give inaccurate or misleading guidance because it's collaborative. You're both interacting with the conversation. You're both attempting to answer that question that the mentee is asking. Thoughts about the collaborative component?
Well, it's definitely something to consider. One thing that I was thinking of was from the aspect of if I'm working with somebody and I don't have any experience per se, that we could pull into the collaborative conversation. What I do bring is a wealth of lived experience in a number of different areas where I can suggest to my mentee what would happen if we were to do this, this, or this instead. So then I've started the creative thinking process with the mentee, got them thinking. I have demonstrated that while I may not have the actual working knowledge of a particular industry, I do have that lived experience that I can pull from that and create those scenarios to have those conversations.
Yeah. So we heard this one from a couple of people, and I use the smell test. Some of the others use I'm just not sensing that it's going back and forth in a correct way. So that's where that one came from. It sort of linked to another one here, the lack of empathy and understanding, because what was taking place, people were mentioning that they didn't feel as though, and feel is the word here, as though the mentor was present. And that what was taking place was they were just sort of getting some scripted response, not one that actually linked up to who they were. In other words, there was almost like a separation of presence. It was sort of like, I'm giving you a robotic response versus, oh, hang on a minute, I want to give you the response that makes the most sense at this point in time, and then let's have that conversation. Thoughts around that one?
What I find most interesting is that people that are just starting out with their mentoring journey, they'll say, well, do you have a checklist that I can take and I can just kind of go through and check the boxes off as we're having a conversation? And what I typically tell people is, no, I don't. And the reason is that every mentoring arrangement, relationship, conversation that you get into is unique. And you can't script that to take place. You have to let it evolve. You have to collaboratively let it unfold as it may be. And your job is to kind of guide and help your mentee down that path, but there is no script to follow. And if there is, I'd be happy if somebody would send it my way.
Yeah. There is a guidance provided through ethics. And the way that I'm sharing it is morals are up to your skin, from your skin out. In other words, your interaction with other people, there are ethics. words like respect, trust, fairness, accountability, these kind of ways of interacting with one another, understanding that and bringing those to the foreground is a form of empathy, of not necessarily going down into the hole and saying, yes, I get what's happening to you. That is compassion in a sense, right? But empathy is being there and saying, listen, let's find a way forward, but let's bring our feelings to the foreground as well if the mentee is wanting to do that. You can't force anyone to bring their feelings to the foreground. But it's that understanding of our humanity that we're bringing into this connection through this mentoring. And I think another word that pops out is rapport. And I don't get a chance to use that word, Doug, very often, right? But there's something to be said for establishing rapport. Do you have a story around rapport that you'd like to bring to the foreground for us to sort of to bring empathy, to bring understanding forward in an example? Is there anything that pops to mind?
Unfortunately, not off the top of my head.
Well, in some of those workplace examples that you share with me, sometimes there is that need, that little extra time to build that rapport, isn't there? Because they're not always present. They're going, okay, I've got to pop into this. I got to go do what I need to do, and then I got to get out and go back and do everything else. Versus getting the rapport set up to allow a person to sort of feel as though they can join you, knowing where you are, rather than going, okay, hang on, I got to, there's this notion of rapport. You share that with me quite often with some of your examples. So can I bring that to the foreground for you?
You could. For me, and I guess why I'm kind of sort of struggling a little bit with coming up with an example is that I see rapport playing a part of the trust aspect. So if I could potentially have one or the other, but I'm more inclined to say that I need to build trust in the relationship, but I also need to do so with some level or degree of rapport so that it's a mutually collaborative journey that we're going to go on. And it's one that we both are going to realize outcomes.
Yeah. And folks, I just want to share with you, I don't always say to Doug, this is what I'm going to ask you or anything like that, because what I want to do is tap into his deep practice. He's very much into the practice of mentoring. I tend to be more into the educating the concepts and about what the practices are. Doug can share more about the practices. So I was attempting to just tap into something there to see if I could find something. And you bring a great point to the foreground, right? Is sometimes we can overcomplicate it, and some words are actually sitting there like a doll inside a doll, and we may not always go, well, hang on a minute, I'm going to get rapport, then I'm going to get trust, then I'm going to get respect. It's actually just sort of dog chasing its tail, maybe, as an example. So great. So thank you for that. Let's take a look at this, the third one of today, which is the failure to adapt, adopt, and evolve. Where does this one take you, Doug?
Well, the first place, when I read it, the first place I went was from the idea of every mentoring relationship that I'm involved in, that the approach to that relationship is customized to that particular individual. And when they change, I have to be willing to adapt and evolve to be able to meet their needs. So part of that is understanding as the conversation evolves, is understanding what are those needs that we're trying to meet, because in a lot of cases, mentees don't know themselves. And so that's part of what they're reaching out, is trying to find the answer to that question.
Yeah, and it's to a point that we've talked about before. Mentee A is not gonna get you doing what you did for mentee B.
No.
to your point, there isn't, you're evolving, widening, deepening, enriching your experience of tools and techniques, which is why you may adopt something, but you've got to then adapt it. So often what we do is we adopt best practices, but we've got to adapt them as wise practices. That's one of the ways that I make the distinction, because just because someone else or another mentor uses it, or you used it with someone else, right, a mentee, it doesn't mean it's going to work for you taking someone else's or with that next mentee. So there is this notion of evolving your practice as you move forward. So one word that I attempt to put in here is adeptability, to be adept at adopting and adapting, and that back and forth that goes with that. I think that's a word that I would bring into mentoring, along with reciprocal and holistic, right, is to bring that in as a way to remind us as mentors that when we're responding, not reacting, but responding, is that we're doing it with a presence in the foreground with that mentee. And I think that is so important. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would agree and I think for me, it keeps drawing me back to the aspect of me needing to be patient and flexible so that I'm able to move forward as well as bring value. And that's one thing I'm always very concerned about is, have I brought value to the mentee in the conversation and the collaborative conversation that we've had today? And if I haven't, then I need to ask that question as to, we've spent a lot of time talking today, and what was the benefit that you derived from our conversation? And it can be something as insignificant to you, where we talk about creating that safe place for the conversation to take place. And that may be all that they are looking for, is a place of safety where they can have a conversation, an open, collaborative type of a conversation. And you get that a lot when it comes to dealing with individuals that are struggling with mental health journeys. That's where you'll start to see more and more of that.
Yeah, and this is where we've had a discussion around the use of feedback and feed forward. Often people will use the word feedback, and I always think of that as you're sort of going back into something that's happened and attempting to find some learning you're extracting from it, versus feed forward is at the time being ready to share some insights and to move things forward. Again, it's a subtle but yet important connection that when you're in conversation, especially when you notice that there might be a mental situation that's present, maybe you can see it, sense it coming up, or they're bringing it into the room with them. So being able to not necessarily tap into, well, you remember when we chatted, a couple of weeks back, it's okay, what's going on now? What are we going to move forward with as we see this unfold for ourselves? And I think the biggest tip here around this notion of being able to be adept at adapting, adopting, and evolving, I learned this from my own experience working overseas. Patience, flexibility, and discretion. That really helped me. And I had to keep evolving that, because there were some situations I found myself in that I would not wish anyone to go through. And I'm just going to leave it at that. There's no need to bring any of that up at this point in time. But the underpinning of patience, flexibility, and discretion, evolving that, this goes back to the other ones we're talked about. If you don't have those, that in a sense sometimes will negate the understanding and the empathy, and maybe lean you into incorrect guidance and things like that. So I thought that I would share those as well at this point in time. Okay. So I think that brings us to a close of these 3 ways that you can negate a mentoring arrangement. And we will be in a couple of weeks talking about the other 4. We're just still figuring out a little bit about what they are and how we want to frame them up for you. But again, the link to the first 3 will be available in the comments section, usually down below or maybe off to the side. Oh, feel like I'm in a plane. Anyway, but also what we do is that I bring us into videos and I have Doug take us out. And what's going to happen is he'll share an important idea from today. And then when I know that he's completed, I will say, take care, and we will close off the video. So, Doug?
So for me, from today's conversation, the failure or the ability to be able to adapt and evolve was the one thing that actually stood out for me. And part of the reason I think for that is because of the deep practice in that, it's the understanding that every mentoring arrangement, every mentoring relationship is unique and needs to be how you approach it. It needs to be a customized approach, and part of that is being willing to adapt and evolve.
All right. Take care, everyone.